at him. Wait, the police are wait.
Because I saw what he did to Katie and I was scared he was going to do it to me.
No! Stop!
Yes, I am. I'll pull her out.
You don't even have enough self-esteem, okay? You don't make sure things get done!
At Elan, the first thing they learn is you're not going to get out of here.
We'll start with the uncomfortable and gradually uncover some of the most gruesome, soul-rotting things I could find on the internet. Missing children, mutilated bodies, and footage never meant to be seen. Crystal Surlis. It was December 31st, 1999, and in Del Rio, Texas, 10-year-old Crystal Surlis was visiting her friend Kayleen Harris for a sleepover. But what should have been an otherwise fun night was about to take a very sinister and tragic turn.
Will you show us how you had your hands?
I had him up like this.
You tell us why you had your hands up close to your neck?
Because I saw what he did to Katie and I was scared he was going to do it to me.
I came over here and there's a little girl sleeping here. And then I looked in here, 2 girls sleeping in here. I woke this girl up. The little girl on top was like petrified.
Tommy Lynn Sells, a drifter and serial killer with a criminal history spanning decades and multiple states, quietly entered the Harris family's trailer home through a window in the early hours of the morning. For months, he had worked to befriend Kayleen's father, Terry Harris, through their church, even visiting their home under the guise of seeking help for his marital issues. He had systematically infiltrated their lives without anybody suspecting anything was wrong. But this night was different.
I knew somebody was hurt. I saw the blood. I could see everybody crying. Everybody was frantic. I just wanted to know what was going on.
Terry was out of town, leaving his wife and children alone in the house. Sells saw this as an opportunity for what he really wanted. His only goal that night was to find Kayleen Harris and assault her. Kayleen was sleeping in the bottom bunk with Crystal above her, totally unaware that Sells had crawled into the room. When she woke up, she felt the bed shaking and what sounded like a desperate struggle below. When she looked, Crystal saw Tommy holding a knife to Kayleen's throat. He turned on the bedroom light, revealing the blood already on her neck.
He had a knife across her throat and his hand on her mouth, and he just cut her throat.
The coroner would later document 16 wounds on Kayleen's body. 3 of them all the way through, and 2 deep across her throat. His savage attack had gone exactly as he planned. Crystal witnessed everything from the top bunk, frozen in terror as her friend lay dying below her.
He still didn't notice I was in the room, and he was getting ready to leave. He opened the door, almost had the light off, looked one last time, and he saw me looking at him.
Tommy turned his attention to her. She pleaded with him, promising to stay quiet and blaming any noise on Kayleen, but Tommy showed no mercy. He reached over and slashed Crystal's throat before switching off the light and leaving the room, having achieved his goal of killing both of them.
He just reached over and cut my throat like this. And then I just remember laying there and the light turning off and I heard the door shut.
Crystal's injuries were catastrophic. The knife had severed her trachea and grazed her carotid artery, just millimeters from killing her instantly. Yet, she refused to give in to her shock or despair. Pretending to be dead until she heard Tommy's car drive away, she summoned every ounce of strength she had left and crawled across the blood-soaked floor to check on Kayleen.
I was crawling across the floor in the bedroom, and I came across Katie on the floor. She was kind of making a gasping noise, or maybe she was choking.
Unable to speak due to her injuries, Crystal tried to comfort her friend by rubbing her back, but it quickly became clear that Kayleen was gone.
I laid next to her, rubbing her back, and that's when I realized I couldn't talk, because all I wanted to say was everything's gonna be okay, but I couldn't. And then, as soon as she stopped making those noises, I had this feeling, get out of here, get up, come on, go.
Realizing she needed help, Crystal made an unthinkably difficult decision. She would leave the house and find someone who could save her with what little time she had left. Bleeding profusely and barely able to breathe, she walked a quarter-mile through darkness to a neighbor's home.
I have a little girl just rang my doorbell.
A retiree, Herb Betts, answered her frantic knocking at around 3:30 a.m. and found Crystal covered in blood, clutching her neck with one hand while using the other to write messages on the door asking for help. Herb immediately called 911 as Crystal struggled to communicate what had happened at the Harris residence. She wrote that they needed help urgently and even asked if she would live, a question that really haunted Herb given the situation. Emergency responders rushed Crystal to a hospital in San Antonio where surgeons worked tirelessly to save her life. Her windpipe was severed, making speaking impossible. At best, survival seemed uncertain. But against all the odds, Crystal pulled through. Her recovery was grueling, both physically and emotionally. Yet she remained determined to bring Tommy Lynn Sells to justice for the murder of her best friend. From her hospital bed, she provided investigators with detailed descriptions that led to a composite sketch of her attacker. Within days, police identified Tommy from Crystal's account and arrested him at his home in Del Rio. Surprisingly, Tommy confessed to his crimes immediately upon being apprehended, telling officers he was glad he had been caught because he was tired of killing. But he was so unashamed of what he did that he offered to show them everything. He accompanied law enforcement back to the crime scene for a videotaped reenactment of his actions that night, exactly as they had happened. He described how he murdered Kayleen Harris and attempted to kill Crystal Surlis in graphic detail, confirming everything that investigators already knew from Crystal's testimony. They had their guy. 9 months later, Crystal had to face Tommy again, this time in court. She was the key witness for the prosecution during his trial for capital murder and attempted murder. Despite being just 11 years old at the time and still grappling with nightmares about what happened that night, she displayed remarkable courage as she recounted what happened in front of jurors. And it paid off. Her testimony was critical in securing Tommy's conviction, ensuring that he was sentenced to death for his crimes.
He grabbed the knife and slit her throat. He started walking towards me. I told him I'd be quiet. I promise I won't say nothing. I'm not making the noises. I had him up like this because I saw what he did to Katie and I was scared he was going to do it to me. Over the ledge and to my throat. Just laid there and pretended I was dead. Because if he knew I was alive, he would have came back and killed me for sure.
The aftermath of this ordeal left scars that extended far beyond physical injuries for Crystal Surlis and those close to her. The Harris family lost their daughter Kayleen, an innocent 13-year-old whose life was stolen in an unthinkable act of senseless violence, and struggled with the guilt over having trusted Tommy enough to let him into their lives. Meanwhile, Crystal had to undergo a long journey toward healing. In later years, she started speaking publicly about her experience as part of a series of efforts aimed at raising awareness about trauma recovery and supporting victims of violence. Tommy Lynn Sells' execution by lethal injection in April 2014 marked an end to his reign of terror, but that could never undo the damage he inflicted on so many lives.
Remember next time, your visit's off the wall. Your gets you clean out the showers.
Putting a gaze on a dog, and you better start answering questions.
Now you know you never tested yourself.
And I got a butcher knife, started stabbing myself in my stomach.
At Elan, the first thing they learn is you're not going to get out of here.
The Elan School. In 1970, Joseph Ritchie, a former heroin addict, and psychiatrist Dr. Gerald Davidson had an idea to found a new institution that would benefit the world. The Elan School in Poland, Maine, marketed itself as a therapeutic boarding school for troubled teens. It claimed to offer rehabilitation and reform for children struggling with emotional, behavioral, or academic challenges. Parents desperate for solutions sent their children there, hoping the school could succeed where others had failed. But what they didn't know was the sinister reality behind Elan's closed doors. This was not actually a place of education and help. This was a home of extreme systemic abuse disguised as therapy.
You never tested yourself. You will never, ever. When I was there last. Yeah, well, for a couple days, you've never tested it. You've never tested it.
And that's exactly what you want, but then you won't look at him.
Most of the parents who sent their children to Elan were at their wits' end. Many of the teens enrolled were described as uncontrollable, bordering on mentally unstable. They were addicted to drugs, consistently defying authority or failing academics. Some were even court-ordered to attend by law. For parents, Elan seemed like a lifeline, a way to fix their children in a quick and healthy way. The school promised to instill discipline and provide therapeutic care in a structured environment, guaranteeing that the patient's well-being would be respected. And for a charge of $50,000 or more annually per student, it didn't come cheap. But many families eagerly paid up, hoping that it would give them a chance of saving their children from self-destruction. That was never going to happen, because the school didn't care about the patients, and as Joe Ritchie said on TV, there was no way out.
If you go into a hospital and you don't want to stay there, all you have to do is make an aggressive gesture at a nurse, and you're kicked out. Or all you have to do is light your bed on fire, and you're kicked out. At Elan, the first thing they learn is you're not going to get out of here. If you burn the place down, we'll sleep in a tent together. We will go and get you. Why? Because we have a commitment, all right, to you and to ourselves.
The program at Elan was built on the controversial principles of attack therapy and therapeutic community, methods borrowed from Synanon, a cult-like organization known for confrontational tactics. These methods were intended to break down individuals' defenses and rebuild them into compliant members of society through sheer force alone. But Elan took it to a whole other level, pushing these practices so far that they slipped into the realm of outright abuse. One of the most infamous aspects of life at Elan was the ring. Like pretty much every other process in the school, this wasn't therapy. It was a kind of organized violence masquerading as treatment. Any student who broke rules or resisted authority were forced into physical fights with other students while staff and peers cheered them on, as though any of this would help them to resolve their issues. And just to make it even more cruel, the fights were rarely fair. One student would often face multiple opponents at once, leading to an unfortunate pile-on.
In this corner is the bully who's trying to turn this facility into a detention center. Okay? And in this corner is the house champion who's going to show him why it can't be done. And that's exactly how it does. And we never allow the bully to win.
But girls get put in the ring, too.
Well, girls bully as well as boys do.
The goal was never rehabilitation, but humiliation and forced submission. Those who survived their experience at the school would later recount how these sessions left them physically battered and emotionally shattered. Elan was not helping them, it was crushing them. But while the ring was the most well-known instance of abuse, the program expanded into other questionable means of therapy. Students were made to wear degrading signs around their necks, listing their supposed failures or offenses. They were subjected to verbal abuse during attack therapy sessions, where peers and staff screamed insults at them for hours on end.
You don't even have enough self-esteem, okay? You don't make sure things get done!
So I suggest me the next time you should put my quality on it!
And for those who resisted or failed to comply, there was physical abuse. Students who acted out were pinned down by staff or even fellow students while being screamed at and degraded. Some would be forced into exhausting physical tasks as punishment, scrubbing floors or cleaning toilets with toothbrushes for hours on end. Others describe being pushed into walls repeatedly during disciplinary sessions known as cowboy kick-ass, which left them bruised and broken. And some got the worst treatment of all, isolation. Students could be locked in small rooms for weeks or months at a time with minimal human contact, forced to sleep on dirty mattresses brought in late at night and removed early in the morning. The psychological toll was devastating. 5 people were known to have died as a result of their time at Elan. The lucky few who made it out of Elan alive reported lasting trauma. post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression. It made it impossible for them to truly find a way to reintegrate into society. No matter how long they had been free of the institution, it continued to haunt them. In many ways, Elan acted as a cult, psychologically and physically beating down its followers until they gave in and accepted the treatment. And just to be sure they had a total hold on their victims, Elan tightly controlled communication between students and their families. Letters and phone calls were monitored or restricted entirely, cutting students off from any form of outside support. Parents often had no idea what their children were going through because the school made sure they had absolutely no way to contact them. Secrecy was kind of essential to avoid lawsuits, and it worked. Elan operated for over 4 decades, shielded by its location far from any kind of civilization and the silence of those involved. Staff signed strict confidentiality agreements, and the local community, many of whom relied on the school for employment, were reluctant to speak out against it. Any investigation that looked into the allegations of abuse was rare, and almost always inconclusive because nobody wanted to go on the record to confirm or deny what was going on. The tide began to turn in the early 2000s, when survivors started sharing their stories online. Forums and websites dedicated to exposing Elan's abuse gained traction, attracting media attention and public outrage. One former student posted on Reddit detailing his experiences at Elan, which became a rallying point for other survivors. Suddenly, the floodgates opened, with dozens more victims coming out to expose the school as a toxic, highly dangerous institution. By 2011, declining enrollment and financial difficulties forced Elan to close its doors permanently. Closure was celebrated by many survivors who had fought tirelessly to expose the school's dark secrets. But for others, it was bittersweet. The school closed, sure, but there was no justice served for what they went through. There were some former students who credit the school with turning their lives around, but not many of them. More former students view it as a place of torment that left them scarred forever.
No! Stop!
Yes, I am. I'll pull her out.
She didn't even see the hole up there. I got lucky on that part, I guess.
Is this where Cheyenne is? Yes, that is where Cheyenne is. And how did she get there?
Cheyenne Kirschner. Cheyenne Kirschner seemed like a typical 14-year-old, the kind of kid who might post videos on YouTube about her life, her hobbies, or her friends.
Hi everybody, this is the new profile of Shy Shylin Show. Well, it's not going to be silent no more, it's just going to be Shy Show.
She had a bright smile and an energy that made her seem like she was just another happy kid navigating the difficult period of adolescence. In other words, she was very normal to her followers online. But behind the camera, her life was anything but normal. On October 2011, Cheyenne disappeared. Initially, the case was treated as a pretty typical runaway situation. A note was found in one of her family's cars claiming that she didn't want to be found and that no one was to blame. It seemed plausible enough at first. Cheyenne had struggled with bullying at school and had a difficult home life.
At the end of that particular day, we had learned that Cheyenne had been the victim of bullying at school. We had learned that Cheyenne's home life was not the best. So we were, at that point, leaning towards and confident that we had a runaway 14-year-old that was hiding out somewhere with a friend in Dubuque.
Teachers and classmates described her as someone who craved belonging but often faced rejection. She would have outbursts and struggled socially, making her a target for ridicule and mockery among her peers. Her home life wasn't much better. She lived with her mother, stepfather Terry Abbas, and 2 brothers in a chaotic household that social services had been called to investigate on more than one occasion. It made total sense that Cheyenne would run away to try and find something better. For years, this is what people assumed happened. Posters went up around town and police followed leads that suggested she might have been hiding out with friends or even older men she had met online, But none of these leads panned out. No matter where they went, they couldn't seem to find any leads. Meanwhile, Cheyenne's family maintained hope that she would return home someday. Her grandparents described her as bubbly and full of life, a girl who loved Halloween and would never miss calling them on special occasions. When those calls never came, their hope began to wane. Something was wrong. It just wasn't like Cheyenne to run away like this. For months before her disappearance, Cheyenne had confided in her friends, telling them about the troubling behavior she had seen and experienced from her stepfather, Terry Abyss. She told one teacher that she had come home from school to find him looking at pornography on his computer and threatened to tell her mother about it.
One time her stepdad, she called him Terry. And she was very upset because she got home from school and her mom was at work and he was on the computer. He was looking up porn and other girls and she threatened to tell her mom on him. It was just not a very functional, normal family life.
But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Other friends later revealed that Cheyenne had disclosed instances of sexual abuse by Terry. But these claims were never formally investigated at the time. Because of their age, these young girls were considered to be unreliable witnesses, and any information they offered up was dismissed by the authorities. Terry Abyss himself was an extremely unsettling figure. Teachers and staff at Cheyenne's school described him as giving off an uncomfortable vibe. Something about him just didn't sit right with people who interacted with him. But despite these red flags, there wasn't enough evidence to act on suspicions of abuse while Cheyenne was still alive. Of course, that was just an assumption. It wasn't until nearly 2 years after Cheyenne's disappearance that the case took a grim turn. The police had been interviewing Cheyenne's best friend, who broke down emotionally during questioning and admitted she hadn't heard from Cheyenne once since she vanished. This highly unusual behavior led the police to change their approach to the entire investigation. Cheyenne hadn't simply run away. She was, most likely, dead. And that's when they started looking again at those allegations made by the young girls who were almost instantly dismissed. Given the consistent suspicions around Terry Abyss, he quickly became the prime suspect. The investigators delved deep into his history, uncovering deeply disturbing allegations of sexual abuse from his biological daughter, Cherie Chambers, years earlier. She was just 3 years old at the time. And even though those allegations were deemed founded by Child Protective Services at the time, there wasn't enough physical evidence to press charges against Terry back then. Cherie later revealed that she had actually met Cheyenne during supervised visitation periods with her father, and that Cheyenne had confided in her about being abused by Terry too. There was never a doubt in her mind that she was telling the truth, but Cherie couldn't do anything to help her. In 2013, investigators finally uncovered enough evidence to arrest Terry Abyss for Cheyenne's murder. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with additional charges of sexual abuse and concealing a homicidal death. He was sentenced to life in prison. That's when the real details came out, and the truth was horrifying.
Some things don't make sense, according to what we talked about the other day. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about what happened that day. Things just don't add up.
She didn't even see the hole up there. I got lucky on that part, I guess.
Terry had strangled her to death and buried her body in a wooded area behind their home in East Dubuque, Illinois, where nobody would ever think to look for her, especially given that seemingly the entire world was convinced she had simply run away from home. The discovery of Cheyenne's remains confirmed what many had feared but couldn't prove for years. Even more disturbing was the realization that Terry had continued living his life as though nothing had happened, all while Cheyenne's family and community searched for answers. When he was finally caught, the police realized his audacity. The whole time he had been abusing and tormenting Cheyenne, he refused to hide in the shadows. He appeared front and center in her YouTube videos.
No! Stop! Yes, I am. I'll pull her out.
To those watching from the outside, there might have been no obvious signs of danger, just a seemingly ordinary family navigating their lives. Exactly what Terry wanted them to think.
An Russian woman was arrested this week in St. Petersburg, suspected of killing and then dismembering a pensioner neighbor several days before. Police suspect Tamara Samsonova may have also killed a 32-year-old lodger in 2000.
Granny Ripper. Tamara Samsonova is one of the most fascinating serial killers ever to come out of Russia. For years, she had lived a seemingly ordinary, totally uninteresting life. She graduated from Moscow State Linguistic University, moved to St. Petersburg, and worked for 16 years at the Intourist Travel Agency. Then, in 1971, she met Alexei Samsonova and married him the same year, settling into a modest apartment with him on Dimitrov Street. They lived together happily for 29 years until Alexei suddenly and inexplicably disappeared. Tamara immediately reported him missing to the police, but no trace of him would ever be found. It was as though he vanished into thin air. Following her husband's disappearance, Tamara began renting out a room in her apartment to tenants. She would welcome people into her home, greeting them with warmth and genuine interest. Then, in 2003, she began what would become her life's purpose: killing. After an argument left her feeling slighted, Tamara killed one of her tenants, Sergei Potanin. She dismembered his body in her bathroom and scattered the parts around St. Petersburg where no one would ever be able to find him or put him back together. The whole thing gave her such a thrill that she decided she would continue doing it, killing, dismembering, and disposing of body parts in various locations. For the next decade, her crimes escalated in their brutality and frequency. In March 2015, Tamara moved into the apartment of Valentina Ulanova, a 79-year-old woman who had offered her temporary shelter during renovations at Tamara's apartment. Of course, what Valentina didn't know was that Tamara's apartment wasn't being renovated at all. Pretty quickly, the dynamic between the two became unthinkably toxic. Tamara was relentlessly trying to provoke Valentina, hoping to give herself justifiable reason to murder the old woman. Eventually, Valentina demanded that Tamara moved out. When Tamara refused to go, she believed she had credible reason to kill this kind old lady. She came up with a twisted plan to eliminate her, traveling to Pushkin to obtain phenazepam, a prescription sedative. Tamara laced an Olivier salad, one of Valentina's favorite dishes, with the drug and served it to her unsuspecting host. As soon as Valentina fell unconscious, she moved with horrifying speed and precision. On the night of July 23, 2015, she dismembered Ulanova's body using 2 knives and a saw. Over the next few days, she made multiple trips out of the apartment with bags containing body parts, which she scattered around the neighborhood. Part of her favorite MO, and, in her mind, an easy way to ensure nobody could figure out what she had done. But the whole time, Tamara was being captured on CCTV footage, hauling these bags and even a saucepan containing the dismembered remains. On July 26, Valentina's torso, wrapped in a shower curtain, was discovered near a pond by a passerby who became curious about its contents. Of course, they were horrified by what they discovered inside. The discovery led investigators back to Valentina's apartment just a week later on July 27th. But when police knocked on the door, Tamara greeted them calmly and even appeared cooperative to their investigation. Her confidence was enough that the authorities didn't even really consider the possibility that she had done this. However, traces of blood were found in the bathroom, along with evidence linking her to the murder, such as pieces of the torn shower curtain used to wrap Valentina's body. In her haste to kill, she had gotten extremely sloppy. When the police confronted her with this evidence, Tamara confessed not only to killing Valentina, but also 3 other murders, which the police hadn't even pieced together. Suddenly, her confession opened Pandora's box. Investigators uncovered diaries in her apartment detailing at least 10 murders committed over 2 decades. These entries were written with unnerving casualness, describing the experience of dismembering victims while also making mundane notes like slept badly or drank coffee. This was just part of her life. One entry described how she killed another tenant. I killed my tenant Volodya, cut him to pieces in the bathroom with a knife, and put the pieces of his body in plastic bags and threw them away in different parts of Frzenski district. There was absolutely no shame in what she did. And, if the diary is to be believed, she went much further than just killing. The writings hinted at cannibalistic acts. Internal organs were reportedly removed from victims' bodies, raising suspicions that Tamara may have consumed them, given the total lack of any reason to remove the organs otherwise. Of course, that claim is totally unproven and only based on police speculation. But even if she didn't consume the organs, removing them is an unnecessarily gruesome step. Tamara displayed an unsettling lack of remorse throughout her arrest and even the trial proceedings. In court, she admitted guilt without hesitation and even expressed relief that her crimes had finally come to light, telling the judge, "I am guilty and deserve punishment." It was as though she loved the attention that she was receiving. At one point during her trial, she blew kisses to reporters, an unsettling gesture that underscored her detachment from reality. This, to her, was just a casual part of her life. Her psychiatric evaluation revealed that she was a danger both to society and herself. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia after multiple hospitalizations, deemed unfit for trial, and sent for compulsory psychiatric treatment at a specialized hospital in Kazan. But none of it helped her case. Investigators kept linking her diary entries to unsolved across St. Petersburg. She had been one of the most prolific and unknown killers to ever strike in Russia. Tamara's ability to evade capture for so long was partly due to her unassuming persona as an elderly woman living alone. Her victims ranged from tenants who rented rooms in her apartment to acquaintances like Valentina who offered temporary shelter out of kindness. The randomness of her targets made it difficult for authorities to connect the dots until her final crime exposed her. But even though she's officially linked to 2 murders, investigations are ongoing for up to 14 others, and possibly more. And many people believe that her very first murder was her husband. But to this day, nobody has any idea where he went. Black Metal Veins. Lucifer Valentine's Black Metal Veins is a film that is not easy to describe in any conventional genre sense.
Signs of eternity.
It's a documentary, sure, but its presentation feels more like a descent into a living nightmare, like a hyper-real horror movie. The film focuses on 5 heroin addicts whose lives have been consumed by addiction and despair. And Valentine, better known for his controversial and hyper-disgusting Vomit Gore trilogy, approaches the subject with his unflinching nihilistic point of view, blending raw documentation with dramatized elements. What you get is this horrifying, disturbing exploration of addiction, self-destruction, and the total loss of humanity. The film begins with an introduction to the subjects, Brad, Raven, Doom, Chris, and Autumn Misery, all of whom are bound together by their shared dependency on heroin and other hard drugs. Some of them are loosely connected to the black metal scene, but that's not the real central focus here. Instead, the film dives headfirst into their lives, showing them injecting heroin, smoking crack, and recounting their personal stories of pain and loss. From the outset, it is clear that this is not a polished or sanitized documentary. It's a raw and unrelenting depiction of addiction. Brad is one of the most prominent figures in the group, and he basically sets the tone for everything that follows.
Oh, she's definitely a keeper, but I tell you what, as soon as she gets out, you'll marry that woman.
I'm gonna be the best.
What's up? You want to ride? I just snorted. I snorted a cap of heroin.
Once described as handsome, he now refers to himself as a, quote, walking abomination. His body is covered in marks of prolonged drug use, scabs, infections, and a gaunt frame that speaks to his total neglect of his own health. Brad openly discusses his tendencies and his complete surrender to addiction. There's no pretense or even an attempt at redemption in his story. He's resigned himself to his fate. He will die from drugs, and he's fine with it.
This is the way Satan works. This is exactly how Satan works. Satan has a hold of Raven, and he.
This is Satan. Drugs.
Yeah, drugs is Satan. It manipulates your mind. It turns you against God. Satan isn't here to bring you to him. Satan's job is just to make you believe that there is no God. He could care less if you believe in him, as long as you don't believe in God. Brad and Raven is Satan's work. That's Satan at work. Satan is looking at his work with Raven and Brad and smiling.
Look, I'm doing this because I feel like I want to. I'm indulging. You know, if it feels good, do it.
Raven, on the other hand, is a total contrast to Brad's nihilism. She's talkative and occasionally displays moments of tenderness, particularly when she talks about her children or her pet rat, Templeton. But her optimism doesn't last very long. Raven's body is also covered with scars showing the toll of her addiction, like cysts caused by desperate efforts to inject herself. She points out one particularly gross cyst to Valentine's camera without hesitation, as if it's just part of living for her. Throughout the film, Valentine's camera doesn't shy away from these kinds of grotesque realities of their addiction. The audience witnesses scenes of vomiting, harassment among the addicts when they're too high to resist, and moments of complete physical collapse. The editing style mirrors the chaos of their lives, full of rapid cuts and disorienting sequences reflecting the incoherence and delirium that defines their existence. But Valentine's boldest move is deciding to show the drug use exactly as it is. There is no simulation here. Every injection and every puff from a crack pipe is authentic. The camera lingers on these moments, forcing the viewer to confront the grim reality of addiction without any filter or distance. It's voyeuristic and exploitative, but also brutally honest and unapologetically unjudgmental. As the film progresses, the deterioration of each character becomes more pronounced and noticeable. Their physical appearances worsen, with their teeth rotting away, skin becoming riddled with sores, and their mental states spiraling further into despair. Relationships within the group disintegrate entirely, shifting from friendly interactions into full-on arguments and brutal violence. The film also blurs the line between reality and dramatization to the point that nobody knows what's real and what isn't. One of the movie's most memorable and controversial scenes involves Raven's apparent death from an overdose. She collapses onto blood-soaked sheets while sputtering blood, a moment so visceral that it feels real but has been widely speculated to be staged. Which may be worse, because that's what the movie is asking. Would anybody even notice if these people did die? Does society care about these people? According to Valentine, the answer is a pretty easy no. He's more interested in creating an overwhelmingly bleak, nihilistic tone to go along with this world. The black metal isn't part of the story beyond its aesthetic connection to darkness and nihilism. The music occasionally underscores scenes to create an oppressive vibe, but it's firmly in the back seat to the primary focus, addiction as a form of self-annihilation. Those who have seen the movie have some issues with the ethical implications of it. Valentine's focus on these people who are clearly at their lowest points raises questions about his intentions. Is he giving these addicts a voice, or just using their suffering for shock value? The film doesn't even attempt to answer these questions. It simply presents its subjects as they are, unfiltered and unvarnished, and with no shame at all. By the end of the film, there is no resolution or redemption for its subjects. Their lives continue on a downward trajectory with no indication that they will ever escape their addictions. The film is constructed to leave viewers with a sense of hopelessness that mirrors the lives it depicts. For those who can endure its relentless bleakness, it offers an unvarnished look at lives consumed by heroin, a glimpse into a world most would rather ignore. But it's definitely not something that's easy to sit through. Marilyn Bergeron. Marilyn Bergeron's disappearance is one of the most unsettling and enduring mysteries in Canadian history.
It's been 10 years since 24-year-old Marilyn Bergeron left her parents' home in Quebec City and never returned.
A young woman with a promising future who suddenly vanishes in February 2008 and leaves behind a trail of cryptic clues, haunting statements, and unanswered questions. It's easy to see why this deeply unsettling story has stood the test of time. Marilyn Bergeron was an ambitious young woman with a passion for music, languages, and culture. After graduating, she moved to Montreal in 2005 to chase her dreams. And even though she was seemingly very successful, something changed dramatically in early 2008. For no clear reason, Marilyn began expressing deep fear and anxiety about her life in Montreal. She told her family she no longer felt safe, yet she constantly refused to elaborate on what had happened to make her feel that way. Her mother later described Marilyn as carrying something heavy that she just wouldn't share no matter who bothered to ask. In February of that year, Marilyn abruptly left Montreal to move back into her family's home in Quebec City. From there, the strange behavior never stopped. On February 10, 2008, Marilyn returned to Montreal with her parents to retrieve the rest of her belongings. During this visit, she seemed anxious and withdrawn, but once again refused to tell anybody what was troubling her so severely. But as she continued to seemingly spiral, a close friend from college began to recall an eerie conversation they had in December 2007. Marilyn had broken down in tears and cryptically told him that something worse than witnessing a murder or being assaulted had happened to her. When pressed for details, she only said, "You can't even imagine what I've been through," leaving him with the impression that she was afraid of putting him in danger if she revealed more. On February 17, 2008, just one day after settling back into her parents' home, Marilyn left the house around 11 a.m. saying she was going for a walk. She wore a long black overcoat with gray fake fur trim, suede boots, and carried only her credit card. She left behind all other forms of identification, seemingly intending to come back. But later that morning, security cameras captured Marilyn attempting to withdraw $60 from an ATM at the Case Populaire in Loretteville. The transaction was declined due to insufficient funds, but the whole situation was much more concerning than it seemed. The footage showed her glancing nervously over her shoulder multiple times, as if she was being followed or watched. 5 hours later, at 4:03 p.m., Marilyn used her credit card to purchase coffee at a Café Depot in Saint-Romuald, a location approximately 20 kilometers south of her parents' home on the opposite side of the St. Lawrence River. When questioned later, the barista who served her noted that Marilyn appeared depressed and anxious during their brief interaction, but the barista had no idea that she would become the very last person to see her. After leaving the cafe, Marilyn vanished without a trace. When Marilyn failed to return home that evening, her family reported her missing to the Quebec City Police. Investigators quickly traced her movements through banking records and security footage, but they couldn't find any further leads after the cafe visit. Her family launched their own search efforts by distributing flyers featuring Marilyn's photo and offering a $10,000 reward for information. They also highlighted distinctive details, such as a Pegasus tattoo on her upper right breast. Despite these efforts and extensive media coverage, no concrete answers emerged. But the investigation took an unsettling turn when details about Marilyn's mental state before her disappearance came to light. Her friend, Jonathan Gauthier, described how Marilyn's demeanor had shifted dramatically during their last interactions. Once cheerful and outgoing, she had become withdrawn and fearful during her final months in Montreal. She rarely left her apartment and seemed haunted by an unnamed trauma, not unlike the situation described by her old college friend. This revelation added another layer of mystery to the whole thing. What exactly could have happened to make Marilyn feel so unsafe? In December 2009, nearly 2 years after Marilyn disappeared, a potential sighting reignited hope for answers. A local man reported that a young woman resembling Marilyn knocked on his door in Hawkesbury, Ontario at around 2 or 3 a.m. asking to use his phone. He described her as cold, wet from the rain, and wearing inappropriate clothing for the weather, high heels, jeans, and a light jacket. Despite his offer to drive her to her destination, she declined and left after about 15 minutes. Months later, when the news reports were covering her disappearance, Salico recognized her and contacted police with his account. The sighting had become one of the most credible leads in the case. Other tips have placed Marilyn and Hawkesbury around the same time frame, suggesting she may have been alive for at least a year after vanishing. However, these reports have not led to any breakthroughs. Over the years, theories about what happened to Marilyn have ranged from foul play to a totally voluntary disappearance or even suicide, which her family strongly rejects despite the Quebec City Police's beliefs. Her parents have repeatedly called for the case to be transferred from local authorities to provincial or federal agencies for fresh eyes and resources, but they've consistently been turned down. To this day, more than 15 years later, Marilyn Bergeron's fate remains unknown. Her family continues to seek answers, hoping that she may still be alive somewhere. Obviously, something in her past had left her traumatized and terrified. But what that could have been, nobody has any idea. Katie Beers. 9-year-old Katie Beers lived with her mother, Marilyn Beers, and her older half-brother, John, in Long Island, New York. But her life was tragic from the outset, and none of it was her fault. Her father was absent, and her mother frequently left Katie in the care of her godmother, Linda Inglieri, and Linda's husband, Salvatore. But of course, this arrangement turned out to be far from safe. Salvatore abused Katie from a young age, and the household as a whole subjected her to emotional and physical neglect purely because they wanted to. Katie was often left to fend for herself, wandering the streets alone at night or running errands for the Inglieris. Despite multiple visits from Child Protective Services and clear signs of abuse, like her frequent absences from school, no one made any real effort to intervene and protect her. But then, John Esposito entered Katie's life, a family friend. He seemed different, a kind and generous man who doted on Katie and her brother. He lavished them with gifts and attention, treated them better than anybody else ever had. Of course, John was not an innocent man. He had a history of predatory behavior. In 1977, he had been arrested for attempting to abduct a young boy and had even faced accusations of molesting Katie's half-brother. Yet the family rejected all allegations, convinced that John was a good man. He convinced them so much that they brought him closer, welcoming him into the family, making him a trusted figure in Katie's life. In the months leading up to Katie's 10th birthday, he began isolating her further. On December 28, 1992, just 2 days before her birthday, he offered to take her on a shopping trip as a birthday treat. But instead of returning her home afterward, he lured her to his house under the pretense of playing video games. Once they got there, John's true intentions became uncomfortably, disturbingly clear. He carried Katie down into his basement where he had constructed a secret underground bunker hidden beneath a concrete slab. The entrance was concealed behind a bookshelf and a carpet in his office just to make sure nobody could ever figure out what was going on. The bunker was meticulously designed for captivity. It was soundproofed with cork and foam insulation to ensure no cries for help could escape. Inside was a coffin-like compartment with a small television at one end to keep his victims entertained while they were imprisoned. John forced Katie into this space and chained her by the neck. When she asked when they could go home, he told her, "This is your new home now." Like every family member she ever had, John didn't care for her well-being, only his own monstrous interests. For 17 days, Katie endured unimaginable conditions in the bunker. The space was cramped and dark, filled with stale air that made breathing difficult. John brought her food daily, but always used the opportunity to abuse her more. She lived with a constant fear that he would harm her further or make good on his threats to kill her if she even tried to escape. On New Year's Eve, while chained in the bunker, Katie watched on television as police searched John's house right above her head. And the whole time, they had no idea that she was just feet away. John initially reported Katie missing, claiming she had vanished from a video arcade they visited together. His story quickly unraveled under police scrutiny. His claims were full of inconsistencies, and he could not have behaved any more suspiciously. Investigators began focusing on him as their primary suspect, and under pressure during questioning 17 days after the abduction, John finally confessed to his lawyer that he had kidnapped Katie and revealed her location. When law enforcement officers descended into the bunker to rescue Katie, they found her physically unharmed but deeply traumatized by the ordeal. The conditions of her captivity were unthinkably shocking, even to the most seasoned investigator. The coffin-like box where she had been confined spoke volumes about John's meticulous planning and depravity. There was no telling how long he had planned this, or how many victims had suffered at his hands. John was arrested and later pleaded guilty to kidnapping charges in exchange for avoiding trial on more severe counts of abuse. He received a sentence of 15 years to life in prison, but maintained until his death in 2013 that he had not assaulted Katie. That claim was contradicted by plenty of evidence presented at his parole hearings. He claimed he wasn't, but he was exactly the monster everyone believed him to be. Katie's rescue marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, but it could never erase the scars left by years of abuse and neglect. After being removed from her mother's custody, she was placed in foster care with a loving family who provided stability and support, finally giving her the love and kindness she always deserved. Over time, Katie began speaking publicly about her experiences as part of her healing process. She authored a memoir titled Buried Memories, detailing both the horrors she endured and how she rebuilt her life after escaping captivity. Today, Katie Beers uses her story to raise awareness about child abuse and abduction, choosing to reclaim her life not as a victim, but a survivor. Bangkok Girl Pla Death. The documentary Bangkok Girl isn't very well known, but Jordan Clark's film is one of the most harrowing, authentic explorations of Thailand's tourism industry ever committed to film. The story is told through the eyes of Pla, a 19-year-old bar girl whose story is not just about her life, but about the systemic exploitation and poverty that drives countless women into similar circumstances.
Up to you, it's up to you. Sorry, she can make for you happy. When you take, she not good, you can cancel, not give money, no problem.
From the outset, her narrative is extremely difficult and harrowing, marked by abuse, desperation, and the looming shadow of inevitable tragedy if she continues down this path. The film explores how Pla was born into poverty but forced to grow up quickly when her family's financial struggles left her with few options. At the age of 13, Pla had entered the bar scene in Bangkok, a world where her survival relied on her ability to navigate the predatory gaze of foreign tourists and locals alike, who saw her as nothing more than a piece of meat or an object for their own desires. Her disabled hand, caused by a severe burn as a child, limited her opportunities even more than her peers, making every challenge she faced 10 times more complicated, narrowing her choices and leaving her trapped in an industry that never cared for her but was always willing to exploit her. When Jordan Clark met Pla on Sukhumvit Road, She became his guide through Bangkok's nightlife, offering him a glimpse into a world where Westerners only see superficially. Pla initially claimed she was not involved in prostitution, but merely worked as a bartender, a more socially acceptable job. Yet, as the film unfolds, it becomes clear that her position in the bartending industry was precarious and unsustainable. The money she made was not enough to fully sustain herself, and the social pressures were obviously going to push her in another, more dangerous direction. The documentary leans into that, hinting at an inevitable future where this economic pressure might force her into selling herself. Which is exactly what the movie is saying, that this is a very grim reality for many women in Thailand's sex trade. It's their only way to survive. But Pla's story is layered with contradictions. The film shows her as cheerful and personable, yet her life is overshadowed by despair. Her interactions with Jordan reveal a very sharp intelligence and an awareness of the systemic forces that are pushing her in a dangerous direction. She knows she's trapped, but she can't see any way out. That's really the most disturbing thing about the movie. She's presenting herself to the world as an optimistic, happy person, yet she's very, very aware and even resigned to the fact that she's moving in a troubling, inevitably bad direction. Jordan's camera keeps capturing these moments, highlighting how out of place her optimism is in this seedy world. She shares stories of abuse from customers and bar patrons, explaining how violence and degradation are normalized. But then we see it. One particularly unsettling scene involves a British teacher who frequents bars like the one where Pla works, and he is everything that the movie is warning about. Entitled, predatory, and totally indifferent to the damage he causes to these women. You can see the discomfort in her face as the man gets far too close. The movie shows this repeatedly. How basically all of her interactions with men are transactional or abusive, as though they think she means nothing, as if she has no value to the world. The power dynamics are heavily weighted in the direction of the exploiters. The documentary suggests that even outside the bar scene, Pla could not find genuine connections that were not in some way exploitative. But as mentioned a moment ago, the movie has something to say, and it's that Pla's story is not unique. It's part of a much bigger social issue. The film estimates that 800,000 women work in Thailand's nightlife industry, making it clear just how deeply entrenched sex tourism is in the country's economy. Many of these women come from impoverished backgrounds like Pla's, driven into this line of work by necessity rather than choice, and forced to be exploited and abused just to survive. The documentary ends on an ambiguous note regarding Pla's fate. While she had managed to avoid prostitution during filming, there was an ominous sense that her circumstances would eventually force her into it. The economic pressure would inevitably become too much, just as it had for all of the other women pushed into this life. Tragically, the movie ends with a text suggesting that Pla has died under mysterious circumstances. The details surrounding her death remain unclear, but as the movie notes, these women live their lives in constant threat of violence, so an act of foul play cannot be ruled out. But it does double down on the very point of the movie. It feels both shocking and inevitable at once. Her life was marked by vulnerability at every turn: poverty, disability, exploitation, and abuse. Even as she tried to carve out some kind of agency within these limitations, the forces working against her were overwhelming. The documentary doesn't offer solutions or redemption. Instead, it leaves viewers with questions about morality and complicity. It challenges Western tourists who partake in Thailand's sex trade to examine their role in perpetuating the exploitation these women are suffering, whether through direct involvement or just passively accepting the idea that it is what it is, instead of admitting that none of these women are disposable but human. Andre Grady. Andre Grady's story begins when he was just 5 years old, an innocent child riding his bicycle outside his grandmother's home in Newport News, Virginia. The day was ordinary until a car screeched to a halt nearby. Moments later, gunfire erupted and a bullet tore through Andre's neck, lodging near his spinal cord. The shooting left him paralyzed from the chest down and unable to use his right arm, forever altering the course of his life. It was a devastating and totally inexplicable situation. Doctors worked tirelessly to give Andre some semblance of mobility. An international team of surgeons performed intricate microsurgery to reconnect the severed nerves in his arm. The procedure was grueling and lasted up to 24 hours, but it marked the beginning of a long recovery process. One that Andre and his family hoped would put him back to some version of his old self. But despite their efforts, Andre would never regain full use of his body. He spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair, relying on the limited function of his left arm and sheer determination to navigate a world that had already been extremely and unnecessarily cruel to him. However, Andre refused to let his disability define him and remained a beacon of positivity for those around him. His motto was simple: smile, it's going to be a great day. He became known as Love on Wheels, spreading kindness wherever he went. He gave away clothes and food to those in need and made it his mission to uplift others despite his own problems and difficulties. He was, above all else, a fundamentally good person, even after everything that happened to him. But Andre's life continued to be marred by disturbing events. As he grew older, the challenges he faced only deepened. In December 2019, Andre went missing during a rainstorm.
Hey, yo, we down here 24th and Marshall, yo. We doing a search party for Dre, man. This shit don't make no sense out here, yo.
His mother reported him missing after he failed to return home, sparking a search effort led by friends and community members. But just 10 minutes into their search, they found wheelchair tracks leading to the back of an abandoned house. Obviously, Andre had been here. However, what they discovered was more horrifying than anything they could possibly have imagined.
Oh, man,
What
bro.
is that? What is it?
Yo, y'all go.
I'm okay.
Go. Oh, and I see a shoe, bro. Is that him? Wait, the police do that. Wait.
Andre's body had been stuffed into the crawl space beneath the house, hidden under a board that had happened to have been kicked aside during the search. His wheelchair seatbelt had been cut, and he had suffered blunt force trauma, a brutal end for someone who had already endured so much pain in life. And to make this even worse, the discovery was streamed live on Facebook by one of the searchers, meaning that the many people watching and hoping for his discovery got a very brutal, bleak surprise. Andre's death shocked the community that loved him. Despite his disability and vulnerability, he had always been independent and determined to live life on his own terms and to bring joy to everybody he encountered. To find him discarded like trash under an abandoned house was just beyond any sense of understanding. His mother described the pain vividly.
Exactly where I told them to find him. Look over to shine your light. That's where they found my baby at. And it's crazy because my son wasn't even dead when I first reported him missing. My son laid out there. He was not deceased until the next following day. So if they would have paid attention to me when I first, I'm not saying that God didn't have intentions, but they took something from me because I didn't get a chance to say goodbye.
He only had the use of one arm and his mouth, and to beat him and throw him under a house, that's what hurts the most. But exactly what happened to Andre remains a total mystery. No arrests have been made, and investigators have yet to uncover who could have committed such an appalling act against someone so defenseless. To this day, his family continues to grieve while campaigning for justice, ensuring that Andre's legacy lives on through community initiatives aimed at helping others. Andre Grady was a good, well-meaning young man whose life was systematically failed by society. However, his legacy lives on through acts of kindness, including giving away shoes, clothes, and food in his name. Love on Wheels is more than just a nickname. It's a symbol of resiliency, even from beyond the grave. Still in the mood for more disturbing content? Our Disturbing Footage Iceberg contains segments you won't want to miss out on. Also, check out our Discord and get the latest updates.